let's recap what we have learned so far. Basically, we started with only try to print out some simple literals. For example, we learned about how to print out number literals and also number expression. For example, we explicitly spelled out integer 15 and also integer 4 and try to do some manipulation using some operation upon them and then print out the output. Okay, that's about the literals. And also we do similar stuff for string expressions. Like we want to print out this particular string, for example, verbatim to the console as output. So these are the literals. And we learn about also variables, which means it's more like a placeholder for us to store either integer or double or string values into a particular placeholder or variable. And then we can manipulate the variable. Specifically, you should really review these example. For example, if you go to numerical expressions 2, okay, no, actually not this one. If you go to string variables over here, you can see that again, you can see the remark that we did previously. Okay, so now you can see exactly the same 3 lines of print statements over here. And then, however, the output to the console depends on 3 variables here. This is an integer variable I, integer variable I, integer variable I. So depending on what the value is currently that is stored in I, we're going to output different stuff into I. For example, at this point over here in line number 8, I's value is simply just the initial value 0. But now in line number 13, when we try to print out to the console, the value for I has been incremented by 1, which means from 0 to 1. So this will be 1. Again, at this point in line number 18, it will be 2. Okay, so that's kind of the advantages for using variables. You can use just a placeholder to actually have some initial value inside the placeholder in the variable, and also keep storing new values to replace it. And we also talk about how you can swap 2 string variables in the previous tutorial video. Make sure you review those, and then before you go on with the current tutorial. Okay, I just found a typo. Let's change that. Okay, so now let's talk about the next step. The reason that we talk about variables in the previous tutorial video is because we want to say, now we want to prompt the user to actually enter some input values to us by using the keyboard. For example, the user might enter their name, their age, maybe 2 numbers, and then we want to return back to them maybe the average of 2 numbers. So we're trying to build out some nice application that's actually much more interesting than simply having some specific values of the number or string literals. That's really the direction we're heading to. Okay, let's just see some very simple demo, and then I'll show you the skeleton of the code, the template that you should really follow for the rest of the course. Okay, so now let's create a new class, and then I'll show you what's critical there. So now right click on the package or right click on the source folder, it doesn't matter. Say new and then class. Okay, so now let's call it simple user inputs. Let me say 1. Okay, so I'm gonna have maybe a different maybe at least 2 examples to show you. Okay, and make sure you choose the main method on the box over here, and then we say finish. Okay, then let's gradually build up the example, and then I'll explain on the iPad how you can trace it conceptually. Okay, let's delete this. So now, every time, so far we only try to output to the console. How do we output to the console? You simply just say system.out.println. Okay, something you have used a lot so far. Hopefully you're familiar with it. So now, what about the other way? How do we read input from the user so our program can actually store the value that user just enter into a placeholder, a variable, and then try to manipulate the values and then return something back to the user? That's kind of the program we're trying to build. So now, there is some facility in Java that you can actually use for reading user inputs. And this is the construct you don't have to memorize, but again, like system.out.println, the more you use it, the more familiar with you will be with it. Okay, so in the test or in the lab, you can always refer, we will always give you these lines to start with, so you don't have to memorize them, but hopefully you will just know them, very naturally. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to say scanner. Okay, now as soon as you type scanner over here, control space. Okay, control space is going to make sure, because scanner, as far as now is concerned, understand the scanner as a library class, like a library facility that is already predefined in Java for you to use. So you don't have to know exactly how to implement that. Like when you drive a car, you don't have to know how to build a car. You just have to know how to drive it. Okay. So now we want to know how to drive a scanner. Okay. So scanner. So it's really important. As let me do it again. Okay. So now, if you only type scanner over here without any import line over here, that's not good, because you want to tell the computer that this program is importing a library facility. Okay, so you're gonna go to the end of scanner over here and then control space. Okay, it's going to import this particular scanner for you. If you really cannot get control space to work, just type it out. Just say import and then java.util, standing for utility.scanner. Okay, that's the only class we need. Okay, scanner, and then you can always have a name called input. So that's a very straightforward variable name. Is new scanner, and then semicolon over here, system.in. So I would say you absolutely don't have to worry about what this line really means. I will explain to you intuitively, but you don't have to understand completely for now, because it will require knowledge about creating objects, which we will talk about later in the course and also in the tutorial series. So basically what this line does, okay, I will just write it to you. Create an input objects, create a input objects of type scanner, so that we can use input to read typically integer, double, or string from the user or keyboard. Okay, basically, okay, that's as far as you have to understand. Okay, now this is the very first line you have to write. If you know that for this particular main method, I'm going to read some input from the user, you only have to create only a single input object, only a single one. Okay, now the last line, this is what you have to put. Input dot, because you can see, if you can see at the moment, you have some red, some yellow underline, which is not really error, it's simply a warning. The warning simply say the value of the local variable input is not used at the moment, but we're gonna use that in just a moment. Okay, so now what we want, always you have to say in the last line, it will say input dot close. Okay, always the last line. Again, you don't have to worry too much about what this really does exactly. Just put it. Okay, so you can imagine that later on, when you have maybe lab tests, or when you have maybe some lab to do, you can always assume, if you're going to read input from the user, you always have put this line first. You can just copy and paste from maybe the lab instruction, or from the test instruction, or from your previous lab. That's okay. Always this line here, and always this line in the last line. Okay, now inside over here, we're gonna follow some pattern over here. Okay, so basically the three kinds of stuff you may want to do. Okay, four kinds of stuff I will explain to you. Okay, you can say, typically you can say step one, you want to prompt the user for input, which means we want to tell the user what they are supposed to enter from the keyboard. Okay, I will just do that in just for example, we can simply say for that we simply print to the console system.out.println, and then we can say enter an integer. Okay, even could colon over here. Okay, and now if we simply do this, let's see what's going to happen. Okay, if I simply do that, right click on simple user input one, and then run as Java application. So what they will do is enter an integer, and that's it. Okay, that's pretty much the same as before, right? So now what's really new over here is we're going to read something from the user. Okay, let's see how we can do that. Okay, and now step two, I'll read an input from the user. Okay, and the input here, which can be an integer, which can be, for example, an integer, a double, or a string. Okay, double simply means like a floating point number, a number with a fractional part. Okay, so, and depending on which kind of input you're going to read, you have to use the input slightly differently, so which I will give you hints. Okay, so now over here, let's say we want to read an integer because the prompt says we want to read an integer. Okay, so now this is what we can do. So now this is also where the variable can be very useful. Because whatever the user enter, we have no control over what the user is going to enter. So we're going to use a placeholder for integer, which means a variable. Let's declare the type of the variable int, and also let's say simply say I, okay? It's assigned to. Now, rather than saying something like a 23, which is a literal, which is too specific, you can assume the user will always enter 23. What we will do is, depending on what the input would do. So now the input is actually something we have just declared over here, okay? So now we're gonna say input dot, okay, so now if you say dot, you got a menu of choices over here. So the typical 3 we're gonna use would be next int, and also next, okay, let me see, next int for reading an integer, also next line for reading a string, and also we also got next, I believe we got something called next double, okay, which I'll show you in just a moment, okay? Yeah, okay, let's see this. So now we can say input dot next int, okay? So what this will do is read an integer from the keyboard and store the read value into variable I. Okay, basically this is what it will do. Okay, so now let's just try to execute the code right away. At the moment, you can see that we're actually going to store whatever value that is going to be entered by the keyboard, and then store that into I, but without going any further. Okay, which means one just stored it over there, but without doing anything else. Okay, so now what we can do is we can say run. Enter an integer. Notice one thing. You can see that there is a stop button over here, which means you can, if you move your mouse over, that means to terminate the program. So that means the current program is not terminated yet, simply because you can see that there's a mouse flashing over here, mouse cursor flashing, which means the program is now waiting for the user like me to actually enter some input over here. In this case, because I say next int, so and also you can see the prompt, we're expecting an integer from the user. So for example, you can say, so I can enter anything I like. I can say 45, for example. Okay, you can see it's a different color over here. So the green color here means whatever the user entered from the keyboard. And then as soon as I say enter over here, you can see now the terminate button there is disabled, which means now the program terminates. That means we actually have only read 45 from the user and store 45 into I, and I has become 45 before the program terminates. Okay, let's do one more time. And now, rather than 45, what about if I say 67? Okay, if I say 67, and program behave pretty much the same way. That means this part over here has read 67 and then store 67 into I. Okay, you can see so far we have making some progress from the previous example. Okay, so now how do we do something useful about the numbers that we just read from the user? Let's do another one. Okay, so now of course you can keep prompting the user for input. You can also keep reading the input from user, okay, before you can do some processing. Okay, let me just do something very simple as a first example. Step 3. Okay, you can say perform some computation on the input values stored. Okay, let's say I want to, if you give me some number, I want to return the square of the number. If you give me 3, I want to return 9. If you give me -5, I want to give you 25. Okay, so now this is what we can do. Let's declare another integer over here. Integer, let's say the square, okay, is assigned to. You can now see that whatever I is, which I don't really know at this point, it can be 23, it can be 67, it can be 134, and it can be whatever, right? So now I can say whatever I it is, I'm going to say I multiply by I. Okay, you can notice that I always put semicolon at the end. So whatever I is, I'm gonna do the square, which is I times I, and store I times I into a variable called square. Okay, so now what I can do is let's execute the program. Okay, So now if you simply execute the program, you will see enter an integer over here. If I say 3, nothing happened. Actually, this is expected. Imagine what's going to happen. If I just enter 3, that means this part over here, input.nextInt, is going to be 3. And 3 is going to be stored into I. Okay? And then this part here will be 3 times 3. And 9 will be stored into a square. Okay? That means in the program internally, I has become 3 and square has become 9. But as far as the user is concerned, nothing has been output back to the console. That is why in the console you don't see anything as a feedback. Okay? So what we should do is the last step is something like this. Step number 4, output some result. Output some result to, I would say, back to the console. Okay? So now, how do we output it back? So now let's use our the scale that we have built previously. We can mix some very meaningful message to the console by mixing string and integer. Okay, so now I can say system.out dot per line. I can say the square of I over here, which is whatever I read over here, of I plus is, you can see the plus over here is concatenation, and then plus square. Okay, I put a period over here. Okay, I think I meant to say over here the period. Okay, that's what I have. Okay, let's give it a try. Hopefully you can follow so far. You can see what's really new up to now. We got some input, we got to declare scanner, and also we got to close the scanner. So these two lines are always the first and last line respectively. And also you got several steps over here which you can review, and then we'll do a more complicated example in just a moment. Okay, so now what you can do is let's execute the program again. Okay, so enter integer. So now let's say if I say for example 3 and then hit enter, the square of 3 is 9, right? It looks like a interesting application already, much more interesting than simply just printing literal values into the console. Okay, now if I, without changing the program, if I simply re-execute the program, now if I say 34, for example, a different number, you can see the program itself has no knowledge about what the user might enter. The user is completely free to enter any number they like. Okay, so now if I say 34, and then the square of 34 is 1156. Okay, you can verify by calculator it is correct. And just do one more. If you say minus 25, okay, and it will be 625. Okay, it's completely working. So now, one thing to note, which is also a very common mistake. You can see that enter an integer now we are not really dealing with any error handling. We assume the user is going to behave well. So which means if you tell them to enter an integer, they better enter an integer. Okay? So now what if they simply say, for example, rather than 3, they say 3. Okay? And then if you do that, your program will simply crash. Okay, for now, we'll talk about crashing condition a little bit later. So now, as far every time when you see anything like an exception or anything exception over here, that means something has gone wrong at the runtime. Simply because we are expecting user to enter some integer over here, but they enter 3. 3 is actually just a string. It cannot be interpreted as an integer 3, right? So that's why there's an error. Similarly, if I say another one, if I say execute the program again, so now we're expecting integer. If I say 23.6, strictly speaking, this is also not an integer because integer simply has no decimal points. Okay, that's another common error that you should really watch for. Okay, that's about this simple example over here. Okay, let's do just another one, and then I'll try to trace the program for you. For this one, it's very simple, so I didn't really trace it on the iPad, but I'll do another one and then show you. Okay. So now what I would do is, I would say know how to read the integer and how to read the string will be the most important thing. Okay, let's do another one. Okay, let's now create a new class over here, say new, and then class over here will say simple user input 2. Okay, and then main method here, and then say finish. Okay, so now again, since I know I'm gonna have user input, so always put the scanner first. Scanner, spell it correctly, control space, which will import the scanner into the program, and you can always call the input is new scanner system.in. By the way, system.in in Java terms simply means the keyboard, the standard input. And also, as a last line, we're gonna say input.close. Okay, and always put these two lines first. So now let's see what we want to do. Let's say what we want to do is we want the user to first of all enter their name, and then we want them to enter let's say 2 numbers, and then we want them to, and then the program is going to say whoever the person is, the average of the 2 numbers you just enter is this. Okay, something like that. Okay. So let's see how we can do it. And let's say this time we want to read, maybe we allow some fractional number. So that means we're going to read maybe a double number. Okay, so just show you variety. So now what we can do is system.out.println. Okay, we can say enter the first number, which can, so this, since I didn't say integer, contain a decimal. Okay, so now make sure I spell correctly. Okay, and then let's read the first one. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say double. Okay, double, remember as we said previously, double can store the number with fractional part. Okay, double, let's say number 1. Okay, and 1 is now input dot next double. Okay, that's the second one you can use. Okay, I will summarize for you in just a moment. Okay, basically you can see the previous example we actually got in simple user input 1. We say next int. Next int can read in numbers without decimal point only. Okay, and now for next double here, you can read any number, including those that actually also contain a decimal point. Okay, so now let's do that first. Okay, so now we get n1. So what about we want another number? Well, basically you just need another variable. You just, if you need 2 numbers, you need two placeholders. Okay, I'm gonna trace the code with you together in just a moment. Okay, and enter, you can see the second number, and then I'll call it n2. Okay, notice that it will be logically wrong if you simply say n1 is reassigned to input the next double. What's wrong with this? That means as soon as the user enters the second number, you're going to replace it for the first number, which means there's no way for you to calculate the average between the 2 numbers, right? That's why we need 2 separate placeholders. Okay, we got n1 and n2. Okay, make sure you choose different names for those. Okay, so we prompt the user, we also read in 2 numbers over here. So now, what should we do? Calculate the average. Oh, actually, we want to ask the user for their name, right? So now, here's, okay, let's see. There's also one thing I want to warn you about. There is some little issue about the scanner library that you have to be kind of careful about. Okay, here's the bottom line. Okay, I'll put it here. Put it here. Every time, okay, I'll say if you have to, if your program has to contain next int with next line, which will illustrate. Next line simply reading some string, for example, a name of person, has to mix contain both, which means you actually have the reading number, you have the reading string. You must always put input dot next line after every input dot next int. Okay, I'll just put the warning over here. So okay, so you were kind of Remember, but I'll illustrate to you. If you say it has to contain both next int or next double over here, which means if you try to contain, basically if your program is trying to reading numbers and strings at the same time in the same program, that means you have to really try to end where every input the next int by input the next line, and also every input the next double by input the next line. I'll illustrate to you. Okay, and then if you didn't do it, you're gonna have trouble. Okay, so now let's have this. And then let's say system.out.println. Okay, let's say enter, what's your name? Okay, in this case, we are expecting to read in a string number. Sorry, not string number. We are expecting to read in a string. So we can declare a string variable. Let's say call it name would be input dot next line. Okay, so now remember what we said before in this principle over here. So now you can see that for this particular program, it contains next line and also next double. Okay, so that means you want the reading number and also string. In that case, you have to make sure every next int or next double must follow input the next line. Okay, let's say I didn't do it. Let's say I didn't do it. Let's see what's going to happen. Okay, so now before I do any computation, I want to show you how wrong it is. Okay, so now you can see that what do we expect to read from the user? We expect the user to enter input number 1 and also input number 2 and input number 3. Let's see if the program will at least allow the user to enter 3 times in sequence. Okay, so currently I'm not really following this rule over here, but let's see how wrong it can be. Okay, if I simply try to right click on this and then run as Java application, okay, enter the first number, let's say 23.4. Okay, second number and 24.6, for example. So now, as soon as I hit enter, what do we expect the program to behave? We expect the program to behave to say, well, it should really prompt us what is your name, and then the program shouldn't terminate just yet because the program can still read in our name, right? Agree? So we should be able to enter the third input. But now, as soon as you can see the program is not terminated yet, it's still enabled over here. Okay, as soon as I say enter, well, you can see that the terminate button here is disabled. That means if you try to put your keyboard over here, there's nothing I can enter. So that's why it's wrong. Okay, so now that's why this is very technical stuff you have to bear in mind. But as I said, since we gain lots of experience of using the console and also scanner in the course, hopefully after the first few weeks, after the first few exercises, you'll get used to this. That's why I really want to explicitly address this. So now, how can we fix it? Okay, so now after every input next double or input the next int, I want to say input dot next line. Okay, I would say for this one, I wouldn't want to go to technical detail about why this should be the case, but if you're interested, you can talk to me in person. I'll explain to you. Okay, so now, you don't have to store the next line into any variable. Just do it like that, and it will magically resolve the issue. And then after this one, for every occurrence of input the next double. So after this occurrence over here, I put it here. Okay, and after this one here, I put it here. Okay. Necessary. Otherwise, this particular one wouldn't work. Okay, and after input the next line, we don't have to say input the next line. That's exactly what this rule is telling you. Okay, please bear that in mind. So now, if we try it again, let's see what's going to happen. If I say execute the program again, first number 24.5, second number 56.9, and then enter what is your name. You can see the program has not terminated yet. So that means I can enter, for example, Jackie. Okay, now the program will terminate properly. But now, of course, the output is not there yet because we haven't processed the output. Okay, so hopefully you really see the issue here. So now as a recap very quickly. Every time, if you have to mix the reading of both numbers which can be integer or double, and also to read in the string from the user, for example, a name. You must make sure for every occurrence of input the next double or input the next int, you always put after it and input the next line. Always, always. Okay, you can see that's the first occurrence for this, and this is the second occurrence of that. Okay, I cannot emphasize more. So now let's do some processing and output it back. Okay, so now we can do, let's say double, we're going to calculate the average. Average is assigned to n1 plus n2. Of course, we want to force the order of evaluation and divide it by 2. Okay, that's the average. Divided by 2. And then we can say, do some output. We can say system.out.print. Okay, first of all, let me just exercise different variants for you. Okay, so now we want to say whatever the name is, and then we're going to say call it. And then we're going to say, for example, Jackie dot out to the print. Okay, let's see this. You can say the numbers you enter were, okay, let's see, n1 plus n2. Okay, you can see that. Hopefully you're used to the mix of the strings and numbers together. Okay, the numbers you enter were these two, and system.out dot print line. Okay, let me put this and. Okay, of course you want to make sure you actually do the concatenation over here, and their average, AVERAGE is, and then I can do the average over here. Okay, notice one thing. If you really prefer not to have this extra variable, what you could have done, you can simply just copy this expression over here and then put it here. Okay, make sure you're surrounded by the pair of parentheses and get rid of this. Okay, that's completely possible. Okay, but you know, it's always nice to actually save the computation result into some placeholder so you can reuse it later. Okay, so let me just undo it. Okay, average. Okay, like that. Let's test it. So now, if I execute the program, enter the first number. So now the number is supposed to be any number that that may or may not contain a decimal point. Okay, when we are expecting an integer, you definitely cannot give a number with decimal point. However, if I give you the flexibility by saying it can be a double number, which means it can be either a number with decimal point or without a decimal point. A number without a decimal point. So now, if, for example, 3 is red, is treated as 3.0, right? Mathematically speaking, they are equivalent, okay? However, if you're expecting integer, you definitely cannot say 3.4, right? Because it's not integer, okay? Just bear that in mind. Okay, first number, let's say 4, make it easy. Second number, 6. What's your name? Let's say Jackie. Jackie, the numbers you entered were 4.0 and 6.0. Okay, they're both numbers, so they just added 0.0 to the end. Okay, so we'll talk more about, you know, the difference between double and integer in the class. And their average is 5.0. You can see there's maybe some extra space over here. So what I can do is I can simply remove one space over here. Okay, let's test one more. Okay, let's say what about 23.6, and also second number, let's say 89. Okay, and then your name, let's say Hyang. Over here, the numbers you enter were 23.6 over here and 89.0 over here, and the average is 56.3. You can double check with for me. Okay, it's actually correct. So now let's try to trace this program a little bit more carefully, just for your full understanding. So if you want to learn about, I will show you more about a tool that you can systematically analyze your program called debugging. We'll worry about that a little bit later. Okay, what I will do is I'm going to copy this particular program over here and then illustrate it in iPad. Okay, what I will do is I'm only going to copy the main method over here and then I'll illustrate it on the iPad for you. Okay, so now what we'll do is we go to iPad over here, and then let me just paste the program over here. Okay, over here. So this is the program that we just developed over here, and then let's give it a try. I'm gonna try different inputs with you together. Okay, let's see exactly. Let's try two different cases, and the user might enter different stuff, right? Okay, so now let me use, let's say for the very first case, I'll use blue, let's say green. Okay, the first case. So now, that's not what I meant to do. So now imagine that this is the console. You know what, let me be consistent with the color so you don't really get confused. So now let me put the console over here. Let's say this is the console. Okay, let's say for test case number 1. So now the dark color simply means the output from the console. Okay, so now from the console like that, and then we'll actually follow the same convention. Green will be whatever you enter from the keyboard. Okay, let's try that. So now let's execute the program for the very first time. So now remember, we're gonna do sequential execution of each line. Okay, so for the first one, let's use pink, the first run. So now first of all, we're going to create this particular scanner object over here. Okay, so to create it, and then we go when we execute this particular line. So we're gonna execute one line by after another. So after this line here, we're going to enter the output. We're gonna output this message to the console. So we're gonna say enter first number. Okay, I'm gonna save some writing over here. Okay, that's pretty much what you'll get. And then what about when we try to execute the next line over here? Okay, what this line will do is it will be waiting, you'll be pending for the user's input. So it's waiting for this particular expression over here, next double. So the scanner is now waiting for the user to enter a double number. Let's say the user decides to enter, let's say 14.4. That's what the user will enter. Okay, so now let's think about what's going to happen. And as soon as the user hit enter, okay, what's going to happen is we have basically over here, let me just use pink over here. You can see that we are declaring a variable n1. So that means we have n1 over here. Okay, and then you can store double number only. And now at this point, we know that's 14.4. So now that means this expression will be 14.4. And then we're going to store 14.4 into n1 by this assignment over here. Okay, hopefully that's makes sense to you. And then for this line here, you don't have to worry about, it's just a workaround to resolve the issue that we talk about. So you don't have to worry about this line. So let's get to the second line over here, which will be very similar. So now when we execute this line, we are actually going to say enter second number. The second number, and then we'll get to the next line. When we get to the next line, and now this part of the expression will be pending, waiting for the user's input. In which case, the user has to enter something, right? Let's say the user decide to type. Let's say, let me make it easy. Let's say 5.6. Let me just make it more interesting. What about 5.2? And then the user is gonna hit enter. As soon as the user hit enter over here, 5.2 will be basically this part of the expression, right? And this part over here is going to declare just another placeholder, like a variable for double number, which is n2, and then it's going to store 5.2 inside. So up to now, we got two variables, n1 and n2. One has 40.4, the other one has 5.2. Okay, and then when we hit the next line, you don't have to worry about, it's just a workaround. And finally, not finally, but the next line. So now we go to this one here. What's your name? In which case, we're going to actually print it to the console. Okay, over here, what's your name? Okay, it's going to be very similar. And now, when we go to here, it's going to be waiting for some string value over here. Okay, any string value. In this case, let's say we're going to enter let's say Hyang. Okay, as soon as the user hit enter over here, so now this particular string Hyang is going to be read. So that means this part over here is going to be Hyang. Okay, and then we're going to have basically we're going to declare another variable over here which is called name. And then the name is going to store this particular value here. Okay, so now we reach the next line. So everything now is only really about reading some input from the user and prompt something to the console for the user to enter something, read the input from the user, and then store the value to some variable. Okay, so that's what we have done. We have done it 3 times already. Okay, and now this part is about computation. So now what we'll do is we declare another variable called average. And then, okay, that's how we declare that. And then this part over here is going to be calculating n1 plus n2 divided by 2. Okay, n1 refers to the current value that is stored in n1, okay, which is 14.4. And n2 refers to the value that is stored in n2, which is 5.2. And then if you add it up together, you will get 19.6, right? 19.6 divided by 2, you should really get 9.8. Okay, that's what you will get. So that means once you get this result over here, you're going to store this into the average by using the assignments, right? So that means 9.8 will be stored in average. Okay, so now finally, I'm just going to explain these 3 lines in total, okay, all together. When we execute these 3 lines, we're just going to print out the variable value and also the string literals and combine them together. Specifically, I want to just highlight them, okay? Now, what I highlight in blue, what I highlight in blue will be the variable value, name, n1, n2, and also average, right? Name will be Hyang. And also n1 would be this value over here, n2 would be this value over here, and average would be this value over here. So if you try to run this particular one, what you will get is something like this, right? So what we will get is you would say, for example, Hyang over here, and also you will mention n1 would be 14.4 and also 5.2 for n2 and also 9.8 for the average, right? Of course, there are some literals I didn't really spell out in the writing over here, but you get the idea. Okay, now very quickly, there's only a single run, and then the program will terminate. What if we try a different set of inputs? Okay, I'll just explain to you the difference. Okay, so now imagine that we're just going to run the same class as Java application again. Okay, and basically I'm going to use orange for you. We're going to follow exactly the same flow like this. The same block of code will be just executed. But now let's say the user is going to enter some different value over here. Okay, let's say when we let's say we run the second time. When we get to this point, okay, let's say the user actually enter, let's say 26.4, and they hit enter. So what does that mean? That means 26.4 is going to be stored in n1 instead for this particular run. So that means we got 26.4. Okay, only that. Okay, so this is not the case anymore. It's from the previous run, okay, which is no longer valid. And then let's say when we get to this particular line, and then the user is now being prompted for a second input. Let's say they enter, let's say 3.2, and then they hit enter. So that means this part is going to be 3.2, and then it's going to be stored in n2. So that means it should be 3.2 instead, right? And then what we will do is, let's say when we reach this line about a name for the user, okay, let's say what's your name? Let's say Jihei. Let's say, okay. So now and then they hit enter. So that means over here, the name over here, this part will be Jihei instead. And then it will be stored into the name, okay, which is, okay, so now rather than Hyang, it's going to be Jihei. Okay, and then what we will get is, we're going to get to this particular one, the average. So the average is going to be n1. In this case, it would be 26.4. And then for N2 is going to be 3.2. If you add it up together, what you will get is 29.6, right? And you know the average should be 14.8. Okay, that's what you will get. And then we're going to store 14.8 into average. So that means it's going to be 14.8. Okay, so now when we get to these three lines again for the second run, basically again, what we're going to have to really focus on will be the variable. Let me highlight it in orange. Name, and also average, N1 and N2. So now in this case, they are going to be different, right? In this case, it's going to be, I'll put it here. So we're going to have GHEI over here. And you got the first number, which is N1, 26.4. And then you got N2, which is 3.2. You got average, which is 14.8. Okay, conceptually, that's how you trace each program. Hopefully, that's clear enough for you. Finally, before I end the tutorial video, let's run these two separate runs. And then you can double check with the output and also make sure you understand exactly how the program behaves. Okay, so now let's try to do that. Okay, let's try the first run. Execute the program, enter the first number. I'm going to say 14.4. Enter. Okay, and then second number 5.2. And then what's your name? I'm going to say Hyun over here. Enter, and then you can see here the numbers you entered were 14.4 and 5.2, exactly these two numbers here, and the average is 9.8, exactly how we predicted over here. Here 40.4, 5.2, and 9.8, right? So now let's do the second run, because you can see that the terminate button is now disabled, which means the program has terminated. Let's now do another one. So now if I say another run over here, enter the first number, I would say 26.4. 26.4 over here, and the second number I'll be 3.2, and then what's your name? I'm gonna say GHEI over here. Okay, enter. So now you can see the program has terminated again. So now it will say GHEI, the numbers you entered were 26.4 and 3.2, and their average is 14 point something. Okay, it's 14.8, should be. But now, you don't have to worry too much about 7.9999, because after all, we are dealing with programming world rather than pure mathematics. So now, there's something about precision issue for the programming, which you don't have to worry too much about this for now. We will show you how you can format such input, such output in a more, in a better way. But you don't have to worry about it for now. But this output is correct. Okay, so I've tried to really execute these two runs for you in green and in orange, and make sure you understand how they work and also how the different runs are going to run update the variables accordingly. Okay.